Welcome to Enemies from War to Wisdom. Why do we need enemies? From intimate relationships to politics, tribalism, and community, we cannot seem to stop dehumanizing each other. Chronic conflicts in our families, societies, and nations seem inevitable. In this podcast, we analyze human hostilities from the most mundane to the most sophisticated. We apply psychology, psychoanalysis, art, spirituality, and relational theory in conversation about belonging and otherness. Each program will reach for a fresh wisdom that shows us how to step back from creating enemies in our lives. I'm your host, Eleanor Johnson, a videographer and artist with Emma Troupe, an experimental theater group in New York City, and I am here with my co-host, Paula Young-Eisendrath, who is a psychologist, Jungian analyst, author, and speaker. We approach our ideas each from our own worlds, but always from the spirit and teaching of Buddhism, of which we are lifelong practitioners.
The way that Robert's describing this kind of emotional entrainment that happens particularly among people that know each other or people who agree about their ideology. There is also an entrainment about their ideology, like we were talking about this sort of liberal, neoliberal, authoritarian dialogues that are going on, or conversations that can't be dialogues. There's an entrainment, there's an emotional entrainment that's happening in the group. But if you get too specific in putting your own meanings on somebody else's gestures, then that's called prejudice. That's called bias, or that's called projection or attribution. Then it's not.
Yeah, no, I agree. You can't read too much into it, but what I'm talking about is on the level of what's ordinarily called something like vibes.
Yeah,
you can pick up
subtle
a vibe.
Communication.
People talk
you
about
can
that all the time.
misinterpret
You
that.
misinterpret it too.
You can misinterpret it. But on the other hand, you can also pick it up.
Mm-hmm.
That happens sometimes. Even if the other person, you could check with the other person and say no.
Right.
Because they're not lying.
Because they're not conscious of it.
They're not lying to you. They just don't know it. So, but it's more on the level of vibes. Now, how much of our relationship is, how important, I should say, are vibes in a relationship? I think they're quite important.
Oh, yeah, they are. They're very foundational, yeah. Could you read again the definition you read from Robert's book?
Propaganda's intent is to circumvent thought and reflection, and it undermines learning from experience, which I found particularly meaningful because direct experience in our life and what we know about that. The propagandist intends to dominate another's mind precisely to prevent him or her from originating his or her own thoughts.
Yeah.
You're doing it, there is an intention, there is a wish, there is a desire behind it. Just not aware of it.
Right.
So it's not unintentional, it's unconscious.
It's unconscious.
I should add that this level of communication I'm talking about is not always propagandistic. That it's also used for other purposes, other intentions, which is to convey emotional states. It's a form of emotional communication, so you can kind of produce an emotional state, and artists do this very well.
Well, speakers do it too.
In another person, speakers, good orators know how to do it, but ordinary people do it just when they're talking to each other in this channel. It's a way of I'm showing you how I feel. That's not intended to keep you from thinking. In fact, it's intended to help you think and understand and to have a certain kind of experience that you're supposed to learn from. The difference is that if I'm just conveying my emotional state to you, let's say, letting you know that I feel angry or sad or something like that, if that's all I'm doing, then I am letting you be free to make what you will of that experience and to do what you want with it. If I'm showing you I'm sad as part of a larger maneuver to get you to do something to make me not sad, then that's different. That's more like propaganda.
Well, today I was talking to Lisa Pressman about parents having anxieties about COVID virus and then kind of conveying the anxieties without words. She said, and I believe, and I think this is where also it's important to use your words, because your words actually give a succinct sense of what actually you want to convey or you intend to convey. It could be that your entrainment, your emotional entrainment, is conveying something that you habituated to as a child, that you use to defend yourself, but it isn't actually where you want to communicate with the other person. So that's why I think words, I know that Harold Searles, the psychoanalyst who did a lot of work with schizophrenics, talks a lot about the difference between a touch and a word. He said a touch can mean so many things. If I touch your arm, I might be touching your arm because I'm controlling you, or because I'm loving you, or because I'm angry with you. But only the words will actually divide that up so that I can say, oh, I'm feeling close to you. Whereas you might receive that as, oh, she's trying to control me. And so it's putting things into words that often reduces the meaning of propaganda.
It's very well put, and I think that's where psychoanalysis comes in. Because what we try to do as psychoanalysts is pick up on these vibes, right? And it's not just listening to the words and kind of solving puzzles and, oh, well, you made this slip, or it's not that kind of stuff at all. But, some people may think it is. It's really putting these things that fly below the verbal level into words, translating them into words so that they can be thought about. Whatever they may mean or something, we're not really, again, may not be the popular view, but we're not really that interested in explaining to people what their words or their emotions or whatever it is we pick up from them, what it means. We're interested in having them just know what they are, know what's going on inside them on this level, holding up a mirror. So and we hope they can recognize themselves in that mirror.
So, the problem there is that's the analyst on a one-way street. That's the analyst as the blank screen at the mirror. And the analyst is also having an experience, a subjective experience, an emotional experience. And, that's why even going back to the Bion sort of basic assumption group, as long as Bion is in the room, he's having a big effect. Whether he's saying something or not, he's a big human being, he has big experience, he makes big impressions. And so the actual sitting in the room is actually a big impression on somebody else. You can't sit in the room like a chair sits in the room. You convey through your vibes something. You're not like a chair. You're not even like a dog, because the other person recognizes you as human. So they recognize that you also are having a world of experience. And I think sometimes some of the bad, let's say, marketing that psychoanalysis gets is because the psychoanalyst wanted to appear like a blank screen or like a mirror. And so then the idea was the psychoanalyst is going to tell you how you are thinking, but the psychoanalyst is not going to tell you how he is thinking. He's just going to tell you how you're thinking.
Well, that's a very good point, Polly. And the mirror I was talking about is not a literal mirror, obviously. The psychoanalyst personality is the mirror. The psychoanalyst receives what would the analogy be? The light waves, the emotional light waves from the patient, and which make an impression.
That's right.
And then you use that impression to convey in words
what your impression is.
What the impression is that you're getting from the patient. There was one other thing I wanted to... about Bion, it was just his personality, and he was a big guy and a reputation. Other people have done this who weren't Bion.
I know.
And weren't big guys and didn't have huge reputations, and they get the same result.
I think not being a psychoanalyst, but the artist and working with the creative individuals, the dancers and the actors and the opera singers and all the people that are part of my work, when we're working on these very deep inner states, oftentimes they don't have words. They can express it through the dance or through the music or the way that we work where we go into the zone, we go into the body.
Well, it's especially music. I mean, music.
The music is a
can
big
evoke
key.
powerful emotions without ever coming anywhere near a word.
Yeah, and they don't know how to say, they don't know how to talk about what they just experienced, except they had an experience that they know, and it informs them in a way that they can communicate, but they can't put it into words.
Well, visual imagery also.
And visual imagery
because,
too.
I mean, a lot of research is showing that metaphor or a visual image precedes speech.
Right.
That it is the visual image or the metaphor that organizes the speech. So the impact visually, and we know from listening to speakers that when people are asked afterwards what do they remember, the very first thing they remember is the way the person looks and how they moved and what they look like. Then they remember the tones of voice, and then they remember content in terms of what they actually remember. So the visual impact seems to be primary, and visual imagery seems to be primary for language. So all of that goes into propaganda also.
Definitely.
Well, you could also make a case for music being primary, because sound is the first sense
perception
that is activated in the fetus.
Right.
And here's so the baby hears the sound of the mother's voice, hears the sound of the mother's blood rushing through the placenta, here's muffled conversations coming from the outside. And here's that music, here's that rhythm and that tonal changes and changes in loudness that are the elements of music. So Donald Meltzer came up with this cut and dry, but he said that there's a level of language that is based on music.
How did he think subjectivity was conveyed? Our own experiences.
Well, through music. Through the music we convey where we're coming from. This is developmentally. First through music.
Oh, you're talking about developmentally, okay.
First through music and then through words.
Because I think that tone of voice and so on do convey a lot, but words also convey. And
and
that's
why we have words.
I want to kind of shift over to some of the issues that are surrounding propaganda, suggestion, and truth. And I want to just sort of make one statement that I think is provocative. I don't think that Donald Trump is a good propagandist. He does not convey a propaganda from the point of view of, let's say, emotional entrainment or any kind of please join me in seeing this way. He is, in fact, much more like an autistic person. He is more like a person who has an inability to pick up on other people's feelings, an inability to join with the group. And so I feel like he gets so misunderstood when people see him as a propagandist or as a narcissist, because he's so bad at both of those. Whereas, although I never understood the words of Osama bin Laden, from people I know who listened to him and could understand him, he had a wonderful way for people to feel things right along with him. And I understood that Hitler did as well, that he was able to bring the crowd along. And it's kind of the opposite with Trump. It's like he's irritating, he's annoying to listen to, and he doesn't bring people along with him. And I wonder if that's one reason why people get attracted to him, because they think he doesn't sound like a propagandist. He doesn't sound like he's trying to entrain your emotions into believing what he is saying. He's not an orator. He is not a person that you can actually enjoy listening to for long periods of time. And that is, to me, is an interesting thing about him that I feel is rarely remarked on. That he's not good at those things.
Well, we have so little deep thought about
Donald
anything
Trump?
that's that's going. I mean, we don't have access to a deeper complexity right now in terms
well,
of.
I mean, I think there's been a lot of media forming of an image of Donald Trump, and then you're supposed to believe that image no matter what you experience in him. I just, in studying, suggestion and propaganda, he's about the worst propagandist that I've ever heard. I can barely listen to him for longer than, say, 5 or 10 minutes because he doesn't entrain me emotionally. And I don't think I'm an outlier on that. I think he's irritating.
At the same time, people do line up for hours for a chance to hear him speak in person, and he attracts huge crowds.
And I think I know why. Do you think you know why?
I don't think it's to listen to his astute political analysis. So
No.
What would it be?
I think that he plays the heel in wrestling. I think he takes every position as a kind of outsider who's saying the wrong things, who's using the wrong words, who is not doing it the way the game is supposed to be played. And I think that's fascinating to people, that the way that politicians typically speak, I mean, Joe Biden is not able to do this at length anymore, but you take a Kamala Harris or Barack Obama, man, I could listen to him for hours, or Cory Booker, or there are many, that entrain your emotions. You're meant to go along with them. You can go along with them easily, and I don't find that with Donald Trump. I think he is more like the heel. I think he goes against the grain. I think people want to hear it because they feel he specifically does not sound like a politician. He wasn't a politician. He doesn't do politics. And I think that, for a large number of people, that's refreshing.
Well,
it doesn't seem like
he
propaganda
certainly
to
attracts
them.
big crowds.
Yeah. There's something about, all the familiar ways that we would look at, say, a politician or a leader or someone who would, there's a kind of rage that is rising in our culture. And I think, Donald Trump is a mirror for that. So the fact that he's so unintelligent and all the other things that break the stereotypes, it's just, he's triggering something, and
So
it's extremely destructive.
But when you say that, I disagree with you
Yeah.
completely. I think he's just on the other side of that.
The heel in wrestling is a variation of the bad boy.
Right.
Yeah.
And the bad boy has always been an attractive figure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Not because he's violent, but because he doesn't follow the rules.
I think it's created a kind of violence that's
I think
extraordinary.
that's part of his appeal.
Yeah.
But I think there's more to it than that.
Well, I think there's much more to it than that, but I think that part of the difficulty when you say, for example, that he has created a violence, I do not think it's he. I think it is we. And I think we have been.
Well, I think
we
he's
liberals
just. Yes, it's
have
not.
been
It's not the
creating-
man. It's what's
But
been
no,
created.
No. We liberals have been creating a propaganda line about war, about censorship, and about global governance. And we want to blame that propaganda on somebody else. Instead of saying that we have been, actually not talking about what politicians have been doing who are on the left. We've been letting it go under the wire. We've been smoothing it over with censorship. And consequently, we've created a propaganda that a lot of people recognize as propaganda. And so when they hear Donald Trump, whom I did not vote for, they actually hear something that's refreshing, that seems like it's not in training. It's not bringing you along on the other line, along that line of not telling you really what's going on, but telling you a story to cover what's going on. That's where I feel there's a problem with the propaganda in the mix of things as they exist right now.
I think we're going a little far afield from the nature of propaganda and its relationship to suggestion, but the fact that something is in training is not necessarily cause for resentment. For example, what you were talking about before, if someone is saying what you want to hear, if it reinforces your prejudices,
Right.
if it makes you feel somehow more virtuous than the the liberals, or makes you feel, or whoever, the outgroup.
More virtuous than the other side.
Or whoever the outgroup may be at the moment, then you do want to get in training. There's a sense of empowerment that comes if you're in a crowd like that, and you're listening, and in analysis, what corresponds to that is what's called a folie à deux, where the analyst loves the patient loves the analyst, and they're a happy couple, And sure, there are rough spots like any happy couple, but there's no question.
There's no room
that they're on the same wavelength. Okay,
right.
Rough spots aside, of course there are always rough spots, but we're on the same wavelength, and so that itself is a basic assumption mentality.
Right.
But it's not necessarily that anybody objects to it.
No, I agree with you.
It may be very welcome, and one of the there are a lot of people who are sort of studying analysis, let's say, and they're buying the idea that what you have to do is make the patient feel accepted.
Right.
And that if you make them feel accepted and show that you still love them and you're non-judgmental, that by itself is going to heal them.
Right.
Which I think is a fully idea. I think the patient wants to believe that, oh good, I don't have to do any work, I just have to sit here and be loved. And the analyst, for her part, says, I can cure, my love is omnipotent. My love will heal people. So it's a win-win for both of them, but it's nuts.
Well, the thing...
So entrainment is not necessarily unpleasant.
Well, no, I was saying that entrainment usually is pleasant. I was saying that great orators, people that bring you along, it's much easier to follow propaganda when it's easy to confirm, your own biases through it. If you are following, say, the propaganda that confirms your bias, you don't even feel uncomfortable for a moment. But the way that you start to look for the truth, because I was listening to Yuval Harari talking the other day with an interviewer, he says the truth is always painful. And I think that's one reason why people have a hard time disconfirming their biases. Because it's always painful to find out that you didn't know what was going on, or you didn't know what was true. Again, in scientific experiments, the way the experiment is put together is to disconfirm the hypothesis, so that you have to be able to falsify what you claim to be true in order to actually, conduct an experiment on it. And so if, for example, you have a belief that you can never test because you always say, I believe this just by my feelings or by my peer group or by my, let's say, basic assumption, sort of in the situation that I'm dependent on someone, I believe my that this is just a good thing to do. If you can't test that, you can never know whether it's true or not. All you can say is, this is what I believe. So I think the reason that science came into existence was really to test, you could say, the propaganda of the church. The propaganda that, at least at that point, that God was omnipotent and omniscient. And that there was some other way to think about that would disconfirm it. That there was a way to test that. So, if you move from propaganda to truth, it's always painful. Don't you think? Even in analysis?
Sometimes it's a relief. It's not always painful. Sometimes if you can say something, if someone has a mistaken idea that you're against them, for example, and you manage to somehow get through that, it's a relief. So it's not always painful, but it's often painful.
It's often painful.
But it's a particular kind of pain, because some of the questions you're asking is, how do you know the difference between something that's true and something that isn't? And I'll only speak about what happens in psychoanalysis, because I don't know the answer to that question. It's a huge question. I cannot answer it in any general sense, and I like to just confine myself to talking what I know about. So in psychoanalysis, I wrote a paper years ago called "What is a Clinical Fact?" And basically, I defined it in a negative way. I said it's arrived at, and your emotional relationship to it is ambivalent. It's not what you expected. It doesn't confirm your theories as a rule, and it gives a sense of how little you can do, and the limitations. If you're at this. In the movies, like this is a caricature, of course, but the aha moment, bats, my father. If you're going even a little bit in that direction, if you find yourself even a little bit standing there, you're probably wrong.
That's right. I would agree.
And it has to be tinged with sadness, actually.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
it has to have an air of modesty about it, and you have to be aware that no matter how brilliantly you may formulate this insight, the patient may not get it, or they may get it and not give a damn. Then so it's a sort of negative definition of how you know you're on the right track.
I think that's,
it sounds like a joke, but I was perfectly serious.
I think
I presented this at a big conference in New York in '97, I think, and it wasn't that well received, I have to say, but I still like it. I like it.
Well, I think it's pretty close to science. I mean, I think that if in really good science, what you're doing is you're formulating something because you think it's a position that will open up a good debate or a good argument. You're not formulating science because you think you've got the absolute truth. You're always in interaction with a group of scientists. And so you're formulating something as a hypothesis. And you're saying, this is my best bet, but, as Donald Hoffman said in the interview, I assume somebody's going to knock it down, because I'm a scientist. And so you're ambivalent about standing up for it. You're not like, hooray. It's more like, here's where we are right now. And then you'll see if it works. But if it's formulated in such a way that it cannot be falsified, so for me, when you say ambivalent, for me what that means is you're saying something that has the recognition of, that it's momentary, that it's for now, that it's not perfect, that it's not going to last, but this is where you stand for now. This is your best bet for the truth right now. And then you wait to see what happens with that. Because we have confirmation bias that's so strong as humans, most of the time what we do is kind of assimilate everything that we perceive to the system that we already have. It's very hard for us to let in something that's really different, that might be really true, because it means it shakes up our whole system. It doesn't just shake up an idea. It shakes up our whole being. And that's what Piaget was talking about, that we assimilate when we can and we accommodate when we must, because we are made in such a way that, it's not just easy to change our minds. And if it were, then there wouldn't be any propaganda. Propaganda couldn't work. But it works because we have a strong confirmation bias. We do like what we like and we know what we know. And, social media comes in to confirm that again and again and again. And as the social dilemma points out, Google found out that it can do that for us. It can round up all the opinions that we already have, throw us media, that will support those opinions. And then those opinions are strengthened. And it doesn't matter what others say, because we assume that we have the truth. And to me, that's the most dangerous situation, when we assume that.
I'd like to tie that old paper that I just mentioned into what I've been doing more recently, because I think what I've been doing more recently sheds light on why what I said in that paper was true, as I maintain that it was. The emotional constellation that I'm talking about is what happens when the analyst realizes that he's not practicing suggestion. In other words, you make an interpretation and you realize that the patient really is free. You've succeeded in letting the patient really be free to make what they want of it, including, well, whatever they're going to do with it, which you might consider is a terrible distortion and misunderstanding or a hostile response or whatever. That's okay. Because you're not practicing suggestion, and you can actually do quite a bit of analysis by picking up on the suggestion that's going both ways. The patient is practicing suggestion on you because they're trying to mold you and shape you into whatever their emotional needs demand, and you're doing that with them. Okay? You can do quite a bit of analysis by tuning into that,
Right.
by keeping an eye on that,
Yeah.
and analyzing that.
It used to be called analyzing resistance.
Well, but you're analyzing yourself too.
Your own resistance as well as the resistance of the other
It's not just resistance, it's more positive than resistance. Resistance is, no, no, no.
Well,
Or this is, what shape would you like me to be? What shape, who do you need me to be? And the transference.
I do think resistance is subtle, and I think it's based on the confirmation
No,
bias.
it is. I'm sorry. It is resistance. I forgot to say that. But it's not just resistance. It's broader than that, because it's also, not what just patient not wanting to hear what they don't want to hear. It's the patient wanting you to be who they want you to be.
Right.
And you're doing the same thing with them. And that's how suggestion enters into analysis. And other forms of psychotherapy, in my opinion, do not really address that. They use the force of suggestion, so-called positive transference, to subtly shape people, and approval on one hand, disapproval on the other, very subtle over time. It's not clear that it's being done, but it rests on this underlying positive transference that they love you, and they think you're a great person, and no one's understood them quite the way you ever have, and so on. Some of which is quite justified, because probably no one ever has understood them the way you do, or maybe they have, but you use it. The point is not what's producing the positive transference, but the point is you're using it to shape them. You're using this attachment to you to shape them. And parents do that with children. So your question is, eat your spinach, it has vitamins. Is that propaganda?
I don't know how other forms of treatment work. I know how I work. I know what I subscribe to, but I wouldn't want to leave it that I would say, I don't know. When people work more with an idealizing transference, with self-object transference and so on, it may be effective in ways I don't know about, because I actually haven't worked that way. And like with science, I think there's a limit to the way that I work. And I work very much with the sort of disconfirming of the confirmation bias as much as I can, with what you might call resistance or defenses, or, and I know I have them too. So it's more, the way that I work is more, I would say, uncomfortable than comfortable. But I don't know if people work in some other way. It might have good outcomes, but I haven't been in that kind of treatment, nor do I do it. So I do feel that there may be a way that clarifying somebody's attachment to you and then dealing with the conflicts between the two of you may also be a way of working.
Then you're a good analyst.
Well, I mean, I don't. I mean,
in my humble
opinion.
In my humble opinion, you're talking about what a good analyst does.
All I wanted to say was I didn't want to let it stand that we might be criticizing a whole way that analysts work that I don't know that much about.
Well, we aren't. I am.
Okay. Yeah.
This is an I here.
All right. I just, I guess I don't know how other. I mean, I think that the idealizing transference and the positive transference can be used in any number of ways, and I don't use them in some of those ways. And
I'm sure you'll be forgiven for having me say what I said.
No, I'm
Allow
not.
me to say what I said. It's okay.
Yeah.
It's all right.
But you call that a propagandizing of the treatment.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so,
You're using
Yeah.
the transference as a tool for persuading the patient, however subtly, which is different from simply telling them the truth. You have an end in mind. If your intention is to convey the truth, then you say what you say without worrying about, within limits, without worrying about what impact it's going to have. If you're propagandizing, you're worried about nothing but what impact it's going to have.
So you were going to then say that parents on vitamins and so on, is that a propagandizing statement when the parent says, are parents teaching their children to just believe in a basic assumption when they say things like eat your spinach because it has lots of vitamins, or don't stare at the computer because it will harm your eyes? Because
you chose two things in your
right.
Has empirical facts that show that spinach has vitamins,
right,
and it's good for you, and it's a green leafy,
right. And a lot of iron.
And a lot of iron, and there's tons and tons. Look at you with your interest in Wi-Fi and 5G. There's so much documentation on the effect of looking at screens for a long time for children. So parents, I think, are being responsible and conscious there. I salute them for having the ability to care enough to get their kids to eat the spinach and not spend hours on it.
But see, part of the problem there is, I agree with you that spinach has vitamins.
You can just, you can get really intellectual about all this stuff.
No. But it's just that if the parents are using something in order to promote something else,
yes.
Like they're using their, sort of status as God to say, eat your spinach. What they're doing primarily is trying to control the kid, trying to get the kid to do what the parent wants the kid to do. And then they're using apparently facts or rationales to back that control. And that's where it starts to sound like propaganda. Not to say that you shouldn't do this, but it just, you may be teaching your child.
You don't want to let your kids loose in the kitchen.
Right, but you may be teaching your child to, follow the leader.
Well, isn't that one of the roles of a parent with a child?
It's arguable with little children, yes, but after a while that the parent may want to set up a situation where the child gets a chance to test it. I read once where Jung, it was a kind of awful letter, I thought, but Jung wrote a letter to one of his analyst friends who was saying something like, I don't know what to do about this, teaching my kid about smoking and drinking. The kid was like, I don't know, I want to say 10 to 12. Jung says, let him smoke a cigar and drink a glass of whiskey and he'll never want one again. Because actually it was like an experiment, Instead of saying, don't smoke because it's bad for your health, he was saying, let the child conduct an experiment, which I don't think is fair either.
Right.
But I just wonder, what do you think about that?
Well, I think a parent who is trying to get the child to eat the spinach, they're not discussing the nutritional value of spinach.
Right.
They're trying to get the child
to eat spinach. That's all they're doing.
That's controlling, okay?
Yeah.
So what? That happens all the time.
Yeah.
And, they're kids, so, right? They need
control.
They need adult supervision.
Right.
I
guess that's what I was saying, adult supervision.
What I'm talking about in my book is specifically what makes it interesting for me, because those situations, so what? For me is when it happens in analysis, which it does at all times. You have desires for your patient, okay? Desires other than they wish they would hear the truth. You have desires for how they should be. You want them to stop smoking, for example, like a parent. You can look at that, and when you find yourself wishing for it, to say, well, why? This is an adult. She's got her own life. Why am I, harping, or trying, not harping, because I don't harp, I'm an analyst, but trying to, convey the idea that this is a bad idea, don't smoke. That's grist for the mill. So,
no, I agree.
If you find yourself in general acting like a parent to another adult, rather than would be appropriate for a child, but you're treating another adult that way, that's countertransference, and that's what you need to analyze. The spinach thing reminded me that the very first cartoon in the very first issue of the New Yorker was a mother with a kid. And the mother's saying, "It's broccoli, dear." And the kid says, "I say it's spinach," and I say, "To hell with it."
Right. Well, in there you could see that the child is like a truth seeker, and so there are ways to look at these.
Not going to fall for that.
Well, there are ways to look at parenting, even at different stages of development. Kids should have a chance to find their own way with it, to find out if this really works for them, because spinach doesn't work for every kid. So it's just when you use facts and reasoning to support controlling somebody else,
Yes.
Oh, do this because of this. You could argue that if you're trying to control them primarily, that is like propaganda. On the other hand, if you're actually trying to teach them about, spinach and so on, you eventually would say, okay, this is what spinach is. And, if you eat it, these will happen. And if not, not. And you have to make your choice, because it isn't like spinach is good for everybody. All people don't like it. I think that, again, the thing that I find that I come back to as testing for the truth is if I can hold something in such a way that I could say, yes, I could see the other side of the argument. I could falsify this. Here's where I stand. I think spinach is good. And yet I can understand that some people may never like it or eat it, and they'd be fine without it, so that I'm not using that to try to bring a controlled outcome, but I'm using it instead to try to show the truth about something. Yeah. And I think you could see that in various kinds of arguments that people make. I think you see it in belief systems, and I think you see it also in dialogues. If there can't be two sides, two things that have two sides, because there can only be one side, because it has to turn out that way, that's more like propaganda. Then you're trying to control. You're not trying to find the truth. And while it's hard to find the truth in media, I think one way to look at it is that usually it's going to be somewhat painful. It's going to be ambivalent. It's not going to be perfect. And also, it will allow for the other side. There will be a chance that it can be falsified. It's not going to say, this is it, this is the absolute truth, and nothing else can enter into this debate, because as humans, we don't know the absolute truth. We don't know what the situation is here. And that is actually the truth, is that we don't know.
That's a powerful place to end.
Well, one very wise analyst once said, you should never, ever let the patient forget that everything you say is only your opinion.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for listening. And to continue the conversation, you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can find past episodes of the podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and CastBox. Enemies from War to Wisdom is recorded and produced by Chris Coltrane.